All right, everyone, welcome back. Thank you so much for joining us. I hope everybody got some caffeine, got some sugar, and is ready to go. Just a heads up that with this panel, we are going to have a little bit of discussion, but then we really wanted to save some time for Q&A and really wanted to be able to have a conversation with people who are in the room. So be thinking of questions and be ready because we really want this to feel participatory. So my name is Kat Duffy, for those of you who don't know me. I'm the Vice President of Global Technology Programs at Internews, and so I oversee our digital safety, digital rights, and internet freedom initiatives. I am so excited for our panel, with all due respect to the men here, our all-female panel this afternoon, and I'd love to introduce our panelists. So our first panelist is Carolina Botero. She is a CEO, she's the CEO of Karisma, which is one of the leading digital rights organizations in Latin America and is based out of Colombia. And we have Emily Efeti Miki. She is the founder and CEO of the Denis Miki Foundation in Cameroon, as well as Ifiti Ventures. And then we have Ashnah Kalemera, who is a programs officer at CIPESA. CIPESA is also one of the leading digital rights organizations in Africa and is based in Uganda. And finally, we have Babette and Ngene, my fearless colleague, who is the director of global technology programs at Internews and has for many years overseen our digital rights programming as well. I think from the last panel, we heard lots of different trends. So some of the things that I picked up on, and I'm sure others heard different things as well. We have a lot of laws that are emerging right now based on expanded connectivity and the internet that are on their face aimed at benefiting society, or on their face are aimed at keeping citizens secure, but that may have significant ramifications, significant negative ramifications, and we're struggling right now to respond to those emerging laws as civil society. I also heard that the intention to do good may be legitimate and may be there, but that in many countries, especially countries where there's a history of authoritarian rule, there can also be a feeling that authoritarianism is right around the corner and that things could shift very rapidly. And so we need better protections in place to create norms and frameworks that will mitigate the impact of that if things begin to swing that way. And so that it's up to civil society to really flag that potential for abuse. We also heard resoundingly from the panel that digital rights must be connected more fundamentally to human rights as a concept and to broader human rights norms, that digital rights are not a separate thing to think about. They are part and parcel of how we need to conceive of human rights in 2019. We also heard a big divide between the language of existing laws and their current implementation. We heard a need for better pathways towards decentralization and better options for decentralization as opposed to having to rely on monoliths and monopolies. We heard that there is a real conflation right now between the private sector and governments in terms of who is really doing the surveilling, who has the information, and how do you hold different actors accountable through different mechanisms. We finally heard about the challenge, but also the opportunity that we have right now of collective problems and how we need to come at them with collective solutions, and that is extremely challenging to do in an effective or organized fashion. And we heard, famously, about the gap between chasing the sexy and supporting the necessary, which I will just say is very true and is something that I think in DC we have to think about a lot because so much of the support and so many of the organizations that focus on trying to identify solutions at the local level have bases in DC and can get really drawn into DC-focused concepts as opposed to digging deep and understanding what the necessary remains at the local level. And finally, we heard a wonderful cry from Miki to put the money where the values are and not where the sexy tech is. And so with that, I really want to turn it over to our panelists because we asked our panelists to come here today and talk to you about what they are doing as civil society leaders to solve for many of these problems as well as other ones. What are the solutions they're trying to construct? What are the obstacles they're facing on the ground? And what better support do they need from international funders, from international institutions, and from international NGOs? And so with that, I will start with Carolina. And I will just ask as an initial question, what are the solutions that you have been deploying to deal with these challenges on the ground, and how are you thinking about it, especially now as we're seeing space shift pretty dramatically in Latin America?
Well, thank you very much, firstly, for this invitation by Internews to be here talking to you. I was following up on the conversation that the previous panel had. I think it is very important to understand that this idea of technology deployment, with good faith and good intentions, land in a very different landscape. In Latin America, there is a problem with the social fabric. It's either broken or stigmatized, and anyway, where it exists, they have full hands. So connecting digital rights digital rights is really the next layer of human rights, but that connection is hard for ground-based organizations, and it's really needed to connect those. There's been a big effort from digital rights organization in the region to make those connections, but that is not necessarily easy to do. That would be my first thing. There's also the idea of regulations appearing here and there, or even the techno-solutionism that appears here and there. Relies or land in countries where there is a lot of lack of institutional support, and oftentimes they arrive with the global north idea of something that might work, but it land in this lack of institution that makes it a very challenging spot to grow and to fulfill their commitments. I would say also that infrastructure is another point of inflection. Givenga said we're trying to reach now the 60%. In Latin America, the average of connectivity is 50%, but that number doesn't say much if you consider that the infrastructure that is used is different from what you think especially in developed countries. For instance, most of the people is connected with cell phone, and that makes a huge difference. And it also, for instance, doesn't show that in most of our countries the zero rating it's deployed. Most of the countries have zero rating, and I don't think it's possible to go backwards with that. That's the reality. But it also means that for people who live in developed countries, it is hard to understand that reality. That's why, for instance, WhatsApp is the king in Latin America, because it's for free. And that means that it's hard to explain or to try to make other tools probably safer, for instance, Signal, to get a share of the market, but it will be even harder to have our own autonomous infrastructure deployed because it's already a big market share. But I mean, when I say big, it's really big. And it also means that many of the platforms have a competitive advantage that is increasing. So in this landscape, what I think that one of the things that we try to do, and it's ever very, very hard, is cooperation, trying to build connections with NGOs, with traditional NGOs, build connections with agendas, with lessons learned, and to try to be more flexible and more innovative on the way we reach to this, because the things that come from outside, probably following Jibenga, the sexy, it's not just the sexy, but the market sexy. And every 2 years they change. So how do you deal with those things? It's basically, I think that we need to innovate, we need to work with others, we need to cooperate, and to try to find flexible ways of adapting to a very unstable situation. You're seeing during this last month something that we thought was in a better situation now. Latin America is having a new weight of authoritarianism. So I think I'll leave it there, and we'll continue.
And Emily, I think on that, you have been leading, helping lead an incredible civil society coalition in Cameroon that has really brought together so many different actors, that has had a grassroots focus. Can you tell us a little bit about your experience of living through, I think, the longest internet shutdown that we've had at this point, and what it has taken to bring people together around that and move digital rights forward locally?
Thanks, Kat. I just want to share that Cameroon is one of the countries that has had the longest internet shutdown. In 2017, we had internet shutdown for 240 days. Imagine you not having an internet for 1 hour, and then imagine us living in that country, not the whole country though, 2 regions out of 10 regions, for 240 days without internet. I personally had a particular story where I almost missed out on a very important opportunity that was funded by the USAID, the yearly program that was started by President Obama. I was called for the interview by a phone text message because there was no internet. So I went to the US Embassy for the interview, and when the results came out, it's like they forgot that we had not still had internet, so they didn't call me back that I was selected. So I stayed home, I didn't receive any emails. Unfortunately, one of my colleagues called me for a workshop out of town, and I took off immediately. I didn't want to go, then I said, oh, I'm doing nothing home, let me go, because I could not work, I was not going to work, so I was staying home all the time, most of the time. So I took off, and 3 hours out of my town, the internet came back, because my town is like 3 hours from where the boundary from the southwest region is with the littoral region. That's Douala. So I got the email, and the email said I'd been selected. That email had come a week before, and the next day was the deadline to confirm my participation, which means if I stayed home, I would have missed the email and missed the opportunity. So I basically missed out like that for Yali, and Yali has been one of those programs that has changed my life. And I was able to go for the program. And after this shutdown, we started the Digital Rights Coalition. That was a program we have been doing with Internews. And that's helped us a lot, do a lot of work to build capacity and also mobilize our community members to join forces to hold the government accountable not to get the internet anymore. The Digital Rights Coalition, we work together with several local partners, local organizations, digital rights activists, human rights activists, to write open letters to the government, to write open letters to stakeholders like multinationals like MTN, Cameroon, because in Cameroon we have 3 internet providers. We have, and these providers, the main one is the Cameroon telecommunication company, Camtel. So they control MTN and Orange in Cameroon. And when they had to shut down internet in the Northwest and Southwest region, it was an order that was given to MTN and Cameroon, and the internet was cut off for 240 days. But after the work we did as a Digital Rights Coalition, after mobilizing local leaders, after mobilizing local organizations and partners, we were able to put them on the check, writing letters, doing campaigns, creating awareness on people's rights. And with that, before the elections last year in 2018, the feedback and the surveys and the data we collected had proven that the government had to still cut off the internet because there was a lot of tension in the country. So with the work we did, MTN was able to send out a letter publicly saying that they will not cut internet in Cameroon even if the government made them want to do it. So it was a positive change we had. And also we had a lot of stakeholders, businesses, private businesses call us saying, we have seen your letters you've written to the government. Can we have meetings with you to know exactly the kind of work you're doing that can help change what we are facing, because we lost a lot of money during that period for our businesses that we have in those 2 regions. So we had a possibility to get government accountable and put them on the check. And though they have not been able to get internet, they find different ways to do it by doing internet interruptions. So what we face now is at the national level where you can have internet for 15 minutes, and then for the next 5 minutes you're off, and it comes back after 10 minutes, it's off. So you have like a dancing bandwidth, internet interruptions, there's a lot of monitoring, there's a lot of surveillance going on, your WhatsApp is monitored, everybody knows. So you know what you post on social media, you know what you post on WhatsApp. So you're living a life that is being under surveillance. So basically we do a lot of work now as a coalition, educating community members, because the difference in Cameroon, in other countries, as compared to DC, is that in those local communities, people don't have phones. Or those who have phones don't know what digital rights is. So you need to teach them what digital rights are, teach them on how to protect themselves on their phones, because we have laws. In 2010, the government made the anti-criminal law and the cybersecurity law that punishes everybody. The anti-terrorism law punishes everybody in Cameroon for posting on social media without facts. So if you see someone dying in your community because of the ongoing crisis and you write out, they just shot someone in my community, you're liable to 10 years of imprisonment because you don't have a fact to back you or someone to fight for you. So with the Digital Rights Coalition, we're able to fight for ourselves. We're able to speak out. Like if I have to speak out about a situation, it's not just me who is going to speak. It's going to be every member of the coalition speaking to fight for the rights of the local people, for the human rights defenders. So it's basically what we've been doing, and it's creating a lot of impact. And I think that's something that we should work on, which is one thing that talks about the local realities. Because the local realities are not just about, in Cameroon, you will not hear anything going on about artificial intelligence. We are not at that level yet. We are still growing, and we have a different reality. So maybe that focus is supposed to be on the grassroots. What are we doing to support the grassroots people? What are we doing to support the local woman in a rural community who knows just how to farm? How do we tell them about artificial intelligence when they yet have not seen a computer? So those different activities are things that we need to touch on because it's a reality that people are living with. And that's one of the areas that when we touch on, it's going to help us curb poverty. It's going to help us encourage education, encourage agriculture. So those are different realities we have facing on the ground that need to be told. People are not hearing that story. We see all the flashy, we see all the innovations coming up, but then what's the reality people are facing? It's just important to note that in these two regions, they have over 4 million people living there. So imagine the impact that could have in the world statistics. So it's important for us to take all of this importantly. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Emily. And Ashnah, I think one of the things that's amazing about CIPESA is that CIPESA has really grown into being a regional leader, right, on these issues, looking not only at the situation in Cameroon, but in so many, and not just in Uganda, but in so many other countries. And organizing, for example, the Forum on Internet Freedom in Africa, which is, an incredible, for anyone who doesn't know it, a really incredible event that brings together international civil society and African civil society leaders to discuss issues that are happening in the region. Where do you see, in addition to the type of coalition that Emily is citing, for example, where are you seeing opportunities for solutions? What are the things that you believe in right now that you are either pursuing or really want to be pursuing as a regional leader in this space?
Thank you, Kat. Good afternoon, everyone. I think to respond to that, we've got to take a step back. The title here mentions the word authoritarian, right? But we haven't quite put it in context. On the African continent, it's just one country that's classified as full democracy. So Mauritius, in addition to its very nice beaches and resorts, is the only democracy on the continent. There are a few, about 7, that are classified as flawed democracies. Every other country outside of those 8 is either an authoritarian regime or a hybrid regime. A hybrid regime is authoritarian with some doses of democracy. That classification is by the Economic Intelligence Unit, by the Democracy Index, which is by the Economic Intelligence Unit. That's obviously very telling, right? If majority of the countries on the continent are hybrid regimes or authoritarian regimes, then the situation is very likely not very good. And like has been mentioned in the earlier panel and my fellow panelists here, where the internet has provided avenues to challenge that status quo or those democracy deficits, the individuals or governments in power are recognizing it as a threat, right? There are countries on the continent where the leaders in power have been in power for so long, as well as their fathers before them, right? So it's almost like, a monarchy of sorts. So the various digital rights challenges then present themselves in very unique ways, but also with very similar trends across the country, whether it's legislation that's restricting free speech, or legislation that's passed as a guise for cybercrime or or fighting terrorism, but then used to intercept communication and survey citizens, or the shutdowns that have been mentioned. I think Mishi mentioned it in India, but on the African continent, again, 22 countries out of the 50 odd have had some type of internet disruption, whether it's a full country like was in Uganda during the elections, or whether it's a regional one like Cameroon, like Emily has mentioned. So what we've done at CIPESA is recognize that, one, these challenges are not about to go away, just like the leaders that have been in power for a very long time. The challenges are probably going to stay for a while. But the ways in which we respond to these challenges has to be adaptive to the changing environment. So the forum that Kat has mentioned is a platform that we organize to bring together civil society, governments, the tech community, and all other actors to deliberate on these issues. I think it's one thing to recognize, but another thing to come and sit down in a table and, discuss and admit that, we have these challenges or we have these gaps, but what could we do going forward? That's what the forum is providing. And this year, it was remarkable in the sense that we hosted it in Ethiopia. So Ethiopia has had a very not so glorious past in terms of digital rights, but it's a beacon of hope now on the continent. For many reasons, the reforms that are going on in terms of the legislation that was in place that was very restrictive, or the arrest and intimidation of bloggers and all these other critical voices. But more importantly, that it was a leader in shutdowns, right? So hosting the forum in Ethiopia this year was remarkable in the sense that the government came on board and recognized that this is an issue that they are willing to discuss. As a first step, discuss, but also to use the same platform to host consultations on the ongoing reforms, right? Or use the same platform to acknowledge that, hey, yes, we shut down the internet for exams, but at the same time, we're trying to balance, these are not my words, we're trying to balance misinformation or a host of other issues that are, critical to national security or others. So having that public acknowledgement is important because it's the same acknowledgement that you use when you're advocating or pushing back. In some other cases, public proclamations like that by state have been the reasons or grounds for strategic litigation that has also registered some success. So the forum as a platform for deliberating on these issues is crucial because we learn and also reflect, but also give opportunity or spaces where in most cases they're inaccessible. The other avenue that we think is important and we've tried to maximize as much as possible is research. Advocacy can only be effective if it's informed by data or by some sort of analysis or documentation. So there's not much research on digital rights that comes off the continent. Very often it's coming from other jurisdictions. So we recognize that it's important that actors on the continent are able to document and share data or research on trends, on key issues that are happening, be it privacy or non-discrimination, and a host of others. But that research must be multi-methods, right? We're not dealing with a governments where you can research and run a survey and say, oh, how fast is your internet? Or run a poll and say, do you pay the minimum amount of what's the minimum amount you pay for X amount of data? We don't have that privilege, right? So this research has to be multidisciplinary. If the internet's being throttled, like Emily has said, that the bandwidth's up and down, right? How do you document that? That requires internet measurements. There's not much capacity on the continent that can conduct internet measurements. So it becomes crucial to build the capacity of actors to be able to measure the internet and then share that data to inform other human rights defenders that are either advocating or running social media campaigns against the shutdown, or inform strategic litigation cases, right? Because this is an issue, obviously, the judiciary also doesn't understand very well. So there's been some successes in courts, but even those successes must rely on data, credible data. So building research capacity, but also documenting actively some of the issues that are coming up is extremely important. This morning we used the word capacity building and we wanted to find an alternative, but unfortunately I don't
We all
have
want to
one.
find an alternative, and we're all failing.
But it remains just as relevant. There's a lot of great initiatives on the continent that have done a lot in gender or equality movements and empowerment, in child rights protection, labor rights, or traditional law and justice and governance initiatives, right? Many of them haven't yet recognized the link between the work that they're doing in those spaces and digital rights, right? So what does the gender-digital divide mean when you're talking about women's empowerment or financial inclusion for women, right? Most of those organizations haven't recognized that. What does consumer rights mean when you're talking about products that are physical? And what does it mean when you're talking about internet consumer rights online? So building the capacity, oh God, I'm using the word again, building the capacity of those existing initiatives that are already doing great work in traditional human rights movements, to recognize the link, the direct link with digital rights, and, you know, just by default, infuse the two together, right? Will create a bigger movement of activists. Similar with the strategic litigation that I mentioned earlier on, is that in much of the work across probably most fields, everybody works in silos, right? So lawyers, as great minds that they are, and often achieve successes in courts of law, very often don't come and talk to activists, very often don't talk to the tech community, right? But yet, if a case is being filed against the shutdown again, you would need data or evidence of the shutdown having happened. And guess who has that data? It's the internet measurement community or the tech community, right? So making sure that there's collaboration across those silos, the disciplinary silos, is crucial, so that any pushback, be it strategic litigation or advocacy, is a joint voice. Lastly, something else that we've recognized is that there's a huge number of initiatives on the continent that are, you know, at grassroots level or at any other small level that you can think of, are doing great work in terms of leveraging the internet as pushback against the democracy deficits that I started by mentioning. Unfortunately, these initiatives don't have a lot of resources, that's one. They have very limited reach, but also the consistency of their engagements is restricted, again, because they're either working at grassroots level or just don't have the resources to have bigger programs or impact. So it's crucial to strengthen those very small or unique type entities. So we, earlier this year, launched the Africa Digital Rights Fund, and it's targeted at initiatives like that that can't have access to funding that's available in DC, for instance. If you don't have 5 years worth of audit reports or annual activity or annual reports, you're not going to be able to benefit from such funding. But as in CIPESA's position, where we're able to attract such funding, we then trickle it down to these entities to ensure that their efforts are also sustained, and they're the people on the ground. They're not here suffering from jet lag like I am, but it's crucial that, you know, they are able to sustain their efforts and have funding that's flexible and agile, but also responsive to their needs. Because it's one thing to wake up and say, right, we are going to push back on this policy and hopefully have change come next year when it's tabled in Parliament, right? But then wake up tomorrow and the Data Protection and Privacy Bill is repealed, or wake up tomorrow and the internet is shut down, right? So having funding or resources that are responsive to more immediate needs is very crucial.
Thank you so much. And Babette, you have lived and breathed for so long now in this space, right? In the interstices of where the international donor community lives, both public and private donors, right? And public and private, you know, thought leaders, initiatives, focus, that can, you know, be it blockchain or AI, be it, you know, strategic litigation, be it advocacy, what have you. You and Internews as an INGO have really spent years developing Internews' digital rights strategy and thinking about how you bridge that space between what the international community thinks is important and is looking for, and what we're hearing from partners who are operating at the local or regional level about what they think is important and what they need in order to make the same objectives happen, but they're framing it potentially in a different way. They may be thinking about it in a different way. Can you walk us through a little bit how you navigate that and the decisions sometimes that we have to make in order to try to meet both of those sort of actors where they are?
Sure. Well, the struggle is real. So I very much agree with the sentiment of not following the sexiest and like making sure that we also remain practical. But I want to add to that that we should keep our eyes on the sexiest. Because I know that, for instance, like issue around AI ethics may not be an issue right now in a lot of countries, but 10 years from now, they may be an issue. And that's like a lesson that we've learned through our programming. And so it's very challenging as an organization. I mean, I'm based in Washington, D.C. I'm part of a lot of global network. And so we're following all these new issues, whether it's AI, the Internet of Things, you know, like 1 year it was net neutrality. We're trying to keep our eyes on all of that. But we also work with, you know, mostly in the Global South. Our program are very demand-driven. And so we also know the need of our partner. And sometimes we know that that's not where they are. And so how do we balance that? And I don't have one solution to this issue. I can only talk to you about how Internews has approached this as an organization and some of the successes that we've seen. I remember back in 2000, I think that was 2013, I traveled to DRC, or 2012, I can't remember. And at the time, DRC has shut down the internet. It wasn't something that was happening a lot in that region at the time. And I could have never thought that Cameroon would shut down the internet or Burundi would do it. We've learned over the time that countries share bad practices. And as a community, we really struggle to share good practices. And so we've tried a few things under our programs for the past 10 years that I can talk to you about to try to like reverse the trend. And also like, I don't want to sound too pretentious. Like this is just one organization trying to do this. One thing that we've been doing a lot is trying to be more proactive. As a community, I think we're very reactive. When there's an issue, there's a lot of funding to resolve that issue, everybody's paying attention, but we're not really good at monitoring the trend and thinking ahead. We know that there are ingredients, for example, for shutdown. If there's an election, if there are protests, there'll be a shutdown. So we should not wait for a shutdown to engage in a country. So one example that I can give you is when I talk about proactive programming, could be, I can talk about Cameroon, for instance. We were one of the first organizations to conduct an assessment in Cameroon before the internet was shut down. At the time, we realized that like all this country around was shutting down the internet. It might be a trend there. We knew there was an election happening soon, but there was not a community in Cameroon that was working on this issue. And I agree with Ashnah. I don't like the word capacity building. When I joined this field 11 years ago, I was like, I'm going to change. I'm going to come up with something that makes sense. And I still don't have a better word to use. But in that specific context, it was really capacity building. Like people, a lot of human rights advocates that I've talked to in interview were telling me, oh, internet freedom is a human right? What is this thing about human rights online? Like we'd never heard about this. And the internet was shut down in that country for 240 days, and there was no one to respond. So these are the things that Internews do. We've built a coalition from scratch, and this wasn't supported through a global project. It was an assessment that I'd done coming from a trip in Nigeria. I spent an extra 3-4 days there, conducted an assessment, and we were able to use those insights to build a programming that has been going on for 2 years now in the country. Another proactive initiative that we've taken is our digital safety program that we call Safe Sisters. Statistics shows that there's a shortage of female digital security trainers. And so we have, again, this was not funded under a global project. It was built out of private funding that we had and existing other project that we had. And we developed this pilot that we conducted in East Africa where we're trying to build the next generation of female digital security trainers for women that will respond to the need of women. We've also conducted a lot of I will call it like organizational capacity assessment. I'm sorry. A lot of funder have now wants to fund, organizations that are based outside of DC, and I get it. They are the one who are on the ground and dealing with the issues. But the challenge is most of these organizations are grassroots organizations. Sometimes don't have the bandwidth to comply with the funder requirement. And so we've tried to add a lot of, kind of make sure that they have the skill set to be able to manage those grants. So when I talk about organizational capacity assessment, it's like making sure that they have financial system in place. Do they have HR manuals? Do they have an accountant? All those things that seem pretty basics, but are very important for an organization to develop and to sustain and to be able to manage grants. On a technical project, we've also conducted a lot of organizational security assessment. So looking at the digital security practice of an organization, especially the most at-risk organization, and then funded initiative that, and then supported recommendation and funded recommendation for these organizations to improve their security practices. We really believe at making sure people had a seat at a table. I'm also not a fan of it. I think we use that a lot. So at Internews, we're trying to make that seat at a table very meaningful. So what does a seat at a table mean? It's just not like bringing people to this new network and making sure that your room look diverse, but just ensuring that they're actually participating and that they're actually contributing to changes. On one of our technical projects, we brought for the first time tool developers and end users to improve the usability of a lot of open source privacy and security tools. It was one of the first. This tool had been built in Washington, in the north. And the people who build them usually don't have a lot of, don't understand the local context. And so bring those two groups for the first time together to make sure that this tool are more usable for the people who actually need them the most is one thing that we've done under our program. So I would just say that, it's not an easy issue, and I don't think that, core funding is the response to that. I think you have to be very strategic and work with what you have and think about ways to, you have to think about ways to make things work with what you have, because I think, we can never have core funding to fix all of these problems. So we really leverage the resources that we have to make sure that we can get the impact that we have when we do get the resources that we have.
Thanks. So let's say there are some resources, right? Let's say that you have organizations that are really wanting to support the work, or funders that are really wanting to support the work. What are the obstacles that you're facing as organizations? Obviously, there's externalities that you can't control for, right? You can't necessarily control for the external legal environment. You can try long-term to change it, but you still have to deal with it, in the moment. But as organizations, when you are trying to come up with these solutions or pursue these solutions, what for you are some of the biggest challenges that you're facing and that you are striving to overcome, or where you feel like you could get greater support from the international community, to remove those obstacles, right? And to work with you on rethinking things. Carolina, do you want to start?
Well, I would agree first with Babette in the sense that we cannot forget that those tendencies will eventually arrive to us, and what are we going to do with that? But I will also say that it needs to be something that is the arguments that are built in the developed world not necessarily can be applied in our countries without a localization. I need to make it work in our landscape. And one of the main problems, I believe, is that each of us are working very lonely, trying to get to what are our arguments and how do we make the government see the way we want them to see the risks and the problems and so on, because probably they are only seeing for the good and the solution and everything. And probably this is one of the main problems. It's very hard to get fun to talk among us. So the Global South meetings and opportunities to gather together just to talk and find out are very hard. Most of the big conferences, summits happen in the global north, and it's very, very expensive to go. Even to talk among us in the global south, like to share experiences between Africa and Latin America, for instance, or Southeast Asia, or it's very, very expensive. It's not like having a summit in Brussels where all the Europeans are train distance, or in the US with cheap flights and so on. It's not just a matter of cost, it's also a matter of visa. So we have lots of restrictions to meet together, and this prevents us from making common agendas and from learning to each other. I think this is possible to gap up to a certain stage with technology, but personal meetings and trust building and also understanding those local contexts are much easier to build up in personal meetings when you are discussing specific issues. And that's, I think, that is one of the big differences we have. For us, it's much harder to build those common agendas. I would also agree that the issue of research is very important, and providing an environment where craft research, but also flexible research can be done is also key. And it also speaks to us on the need to connect and to convince more academics to get into this field. This is also a much needed work to do. And then in this idea of making connections, we need to work a lot more with traditional NGOs to build bridges and to fill gaps. And that is a very it needs a lot of thinking on how do we do this, and it will get even worse. I was talking yesterday with a friend from Brazil. The whole situation in the Amazons that's Brazil, Colombia, Ecuador, Peru. We need to work with indigenous population, but that means we will need to change a lot our craft, our own abilities to work with these populations in topics that are completely distant from their common knowledge. This is technology, and it also goes to something that Maria Paz already mentioned, which is the idea of not just technology as devices or tools, but to the idea of technology as a concept, and how do we craft it and explain it to them, and probably not even explain it, they know it, but how can we make connections and help them understand the risks and level of the technology that there is for them to use it or to prevent it or whatever. But I think there are new challenges there that are completely connected to the coming agendas outside of our zone of comfort. This is climate change, environment, and all those new but key issues in the world.
Thank you so much. And Emily, I think one of the really interesting things about the coalition building that has been occurring in Cameroon is how aggressively multi-stakeholder it has really become. And so can you walk us through a little bit of the challenge that it was to build and now to continue pursuing the concept of internet shutdowns, like bringing multiple people and multiple perspectives and understandings into that space so that everyone could be kind of focusing on the human rights end of keeping the net on?
Okay, I would just like to say one of the main challenges we've had is bureaucracy and access with the government. When the internet was shut down, the coalition came into place, and a lot of us started speaking out. And immediately the government saw we're speaking out, we started having situations of arbitrary arrest of human rights defenders. We started having threats. So you have situations where you want to host events or meetings, and the government had passed a law that no meetings in the community or in the towns, and they said no meeting of more than 3 persons. So it means you can even sit 3 people together, especially if you're on the watch list, because a list was said to have been created of people that are under surveillance. So you know you're being monitored. You cannot sit together with colleagues. If you have to have an event, freedom of assembly was not permitted because you needed to get authorization, and when you apply for authorization, you don't get authorization. I know Internews also suffered that, where we had an event and they could not give them a visa to come to Cameroon. So it got to that level where even when you got partners coming in, you were double-checked, like, why are these people coming here? Why are you working with these foreign partners? Are you the one who is sending out information out? Because they didn't want information to go out. So it was really challenging for us, first as frontline leaders, because you could not speak out. And when you as a frontline leader could not speak out and be sure of your safety, it means the local person too could not speak out, because if they were very local at that level cannot be sure of their security, when we are not sure, it means nobody could talk. But then the coalition also gave us a space, especially at the fact where we had it on focus, because it was not a coalition of just human rights defenders. It was a coalition of both human rights defenders, local persons, business owners. So it made it a platform where we could support ourselves. And it was so strong that if you knew you were under challenge or under surveillance, or you were not sure of your safety, you could reach out to your colleagues or members of the coalition that I think this is happening. So be on the alert. If I have any situation, I'll just send a message and please speak out for me. And it has helped us a lot. In situations where we have had journalists arrested, we were able to speak out for each other and they were released. So those situations of human rights abuses were brought to a minimal. And it has really been also difficult getting access to information, because the fact that things were being monitored, some websites were shut down, we could not get access to data. And first, we are in a country where data is not made accessible. And now with that, where you could even get access maybe through research, it became very difficult. So it became a challenge also to be able to do advocacy because of financing. To be able to do advocacy, we needed finance, and we didn't have funding. Because the funding, how can I put this? It's like, okay, you have a grant opening or a call from a funder, and the requirements are just too huge for you to meet up. Like if you want to go through the grant application process, it's quite difficult. USAID is here. For a local organization like myself, it's very difficult to meet up to the demands. Like, okay, I know they exist, they fund, but my organization cannot stand to that level. So as a coalition, we could now get access, and through partnership with organizations like we work with Internews, it gave us access to funding, where we had small grants given to us as human rights defenders, because they had to do projects and programs where they'll fund capacity building workshops, technical building workshops, and then ask us to submit small grant applications, and we'll get that to do activities. So it has helped us a lot. It has built our capacity, it has built our network, it has given us a voice, it has amplified our voices, because we were in a very tight community where we could not speak. Even now, it's difficult to speak, but then I think it also put us in a place where, I'll say this as best as I can, where the government thinks like, we are monitoring her, we can do anything at any time, but because we know they have power and people backing them, let's watch it. So we have that kind of access now. It's very difficult. You know you're monitored, but then they are like, this one, if we touch her, maybe the world will speak out. So it gives us a platform, just like Babette spoke on the space on the table. It doesn't just give us a space on the table, it gives us security. It may not be physically seen, but it's playing a great role. The fact that they see us in platforms like this gives us a lot of access. I've personally had situations where I walk around and I'll hear someone say to me, someone in the police office or something, you don't know me, but we know you're watching you. Some will say you're a spy. Some will say you work with the US government. Are you sure you're not a spy? Where'd you get all your money for your projects from? So you live a life where family starts telling you, this work you're doing is good, but know that if they cannot get you, they can get us at home. So it makes you watch your step every now and then. But then the coalition gives us a platform to feel comfortable. The partnerships we see gives us the platform to speak. Because though we know we are threatened, we know we need to speak. Because if nobody speaks, then many, 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 many millions of people are going to suffer. So we need to keep speaking. And it's in this place where I call for partnerships. Yeah, it's important for us to have partnerships that we can rely on. It may not be financial. It's just maybe that support. Sometimes you want to apply for a program or a grant and you need a reference. Who is going to speak on your behalf that I know what she's doing? Trust. To get a visa to come to the US, you need to know that the process for a Cameroonian to get a visa now is so difficult with immigration laws and everything. So you need to prove that whoever you're going to work with is a partner that is sure to ensure that they are sure you will come back to your country. Because they believe everybody's going to run away. So what's your partnership with the person you're going to meet? What's that work you're going to do in the US? How valuable it is? So we need that kind of partnerships where we can say that we have built trust. We have people that can speak on our behalf, people that can support us. So it's something we need. We also need technical capacity. We need people that can support us technically. Babette talked about capacity building, but we also need technical capacity. Like, okay, DC is all flashy. Our offices in Africa is not like this. And you'll get a funding support that will not fund you to pay for office rent. It will not give you call support. It will not pay for your staff or your volunteers. And when you work with local community members, they sacrifice time, but they need something to take them home after the work. So we need things like that that can support us, give us a platform to build capacity and mentor those we work with so that they can take a step ahead while we take another step forward. Thank you.
Thanks, Emily. And Ashnah, you think about this all the time, right? This is one of the reasons I think CIPESA created the Africa Digital Rights Fund, is to help answer some of these challenges, right? And you're also looking at a regional level. So you are an organization that now really has built up this technical capacity to manage larger programs, for example, and to manage larger initiatives. But what are the aspects of having sort of gotten to that where you now feel like, you know, there is so much work to do, and also we have to do like X? Like what for you are some of the biggest obstacles and challenges that you're trying to overcome at that regional level?
So it's three things. One is recognition that there are areas that are completely underrepresented or completely not explored. I think very often digital rights by default has been associated with freedom of expression and governance or democratic governance and civic participation. So work is focused a lot around media or, you know, to what extent access to information is realized or not. Similarly, with the gender-digital divide, quite a lot of efforts have gone into that. Unfortunately, areas like disability are almost not covered whatsoever. And in that sense, we are extending exclusion even further than we don't intend to do so. So there's serious need to explore those new areas. So the link, the intersection between technology and accessibility or the rights of individuals living with disability. Similar with refugees or migrant communities. Again, that's not an area that's being explored quite a lot in the digital rights sphere. So support for those new areas is crucial. Secondly, again, from the work that we've done at CIPESA is that we've recognized that the government's not always, I think they're bored of the human rights argument, right? They've had it consistently for so many years, and they remain authoritarian, and their fathers and children and sons will probably rule us for the next, I don't know how long. So, something that emerged 2 years ago is that the economic argument is receiving a little bit more ears than the human rights argument. 2 years ago, when we launched the framework for calculating the economic cost of internet, unique to sub-Saharan Africa, it was a research report. It was 20 pages, very boring. We didn't think many people had read it. But the collaborations and partnerships, the word that's been going on quite a lot here, what that report led to is it being automated. And it's the reference tool that everybody now uses to say that, you know, when Cameroon shut down the internet for X number of days, this is what it costs the economy, right? And it's been a great pushback tool, and it's brought on board more companies and actors that were otherwise not interested in the human rights argument. So supporting initiatives that look at digital rights through such lenses, whether it's economic or accessibility and disability, like I mentioned earlier on, is important. Sustainable development goals, again, that's a language that governments will listen to, right? So if we're consistently talking freedom of expression, access to information, yes, it's great, but it's boring, and they're tired of it. And they're authoritarian, so they won't listen to it anyway. So, so support for those initiatives is great. But for the organizations that are doing this work already, right, whether it's grassroots or others that are more regional focused like ourselves, we learn quite a bit as we're implementing this work. But very often the requirement is, so where's the impact? Write 20 pages about the impact that you've recorded in 15 months. What's the policy change or policy influence that you've recorded in the project for the last quarter? Realistically, there's nothing, right? But from the development partners, that's the language or that's the requirement that comes with the support that enables the work that we do. And it's great to have transparency and accountability in managing resources or funds, but at the same time, those requirements should promote a culture of learning and reflection, right? So this went really well. Why do you think it went well? Can we, in the next round of support, leverage on that success and build something, out of that success? Not always just responding like was mentioned by from the Latin American experience and also Michi earlier, not always just thinking, right, AI is the new big thing in DC. Let's take AI to Kampala. Let's take AI to Accra. No, that's not really what we want to do. But the only way to be sure that interventions are designed to fit in the context or responsive to the challenges and needs in the community requires learning and reflection. So support towards M&E is probably a bit more important than, requiring quarterly reports, for instance, right? So that M&E will enhance the organizational capacity. It will also demonstrate impact in the long term, not in the immediate short term. And it will reduce the glorified admin that some of us have to deal with every day.
I'm going to apologize in advance for the quarterly report requirements. It's not us, it's them. I think that's such a, we see this a lot in so many of the human rights spaces, right? Not just when we think about digital rights, but in general, how do we balance this concept of being good stewards, right? If it's public funding, like being good stewards of taxpayer dollars, right? In all of these instances and in all of human rights funding, you're talking about very limited resources. How do you make decisions, and how do you do analyses that ensure that those resources are being allocated well and effectively, and that you can see that there's progress? And so there's such I think a challenge in meeting those goals, but at the same time, like the timelines of this work, because policy change is the work of decades, right? It's not the work of 18 months or 24 months. And so I think, what we don't see a lot of anyone really doing in any space is saying, we're going to give you just support for 5 straight years to just examine the impact of your work. That's all we're here to do, is just support your ability to actually look at and measure and think through in a much longer scale how your work is going and then report back on that. And so it's, I sometimes wonder if we need more flexible operational approaches to those types of needs that allow for both things to happen simultaneously and give organizations that support. And when we think about this cross-sectoral approach, right, and the need for this, and also the silos that we know exist, the silos between the economic arguments and the technologists and the digital rights and the lawyers, Internews has traditionally been seen as a media development organization, and I think sometimes it can be really challenging for people to understand our role in the internet freedom space when we are so universally known as a media development organization. And so, Babette, I think that's something you've really looked at a lot over the years, and we've had a lot of organizations, especially with the Cameroon shutdown, that have had sort of one mission or one thing that they were known for, and then have had to really pivot to bring in these issues and really start incorporating them. And so from your perspective, how do you see this as being connected to the work that Internews does globally and the larger sort of mission that we're known for?
That's an excellent question.
We're not a news agency.
Yeah,
That's what I learned to say right away.
I wanted to tell you guys a personal story. I was at a meeting at State, I think that was like 3 weeks ago, with the U.S. ambassador to Cameroon. He was here. And so people were doing the intro, and as soon as I say Internews, he was like, I thought there was no media here. What? Like, am I being recorded? So we get that a lot. Like, are you a news organization? But we're not. As an organization, Internews believe that trustworthy and quality information empower citizens around the globe to make informed decisions about their life. So since our founding in 1982, we've been promoting initiatives that support the development of healthy information ecosystem. Today, I will say that part of that healthy information ecosystem include an open and free internet. So as an organization, our mission is deeply connected to the global internet. We have been actually funding and promoting internet freedom work for the past 20 years. We launched our first global internet freedom initiative in 1999 in partnership with the Center for Democracy and Technology. Through that project, we had a reach in like, I believe, 15 countries. We work from, in Afghanistan, Ukraine, and Nigeria. We work on issues including, e-governance, ICT for development, and transparency. So fast forward 20 years later, we are still here. We are still supporting this work. Obviously, we have to adapt our approach because the issues are a little bit different right now. We have to be able to respond to the latest internet freedom issues of the 21st century. As an organization, we now believe that there's not one single internet freedom issue that does not require both a technical solution and a policy solution. So we don't engage or like trying to solve this problem and using one approach. So most of our programming kind of like offer or like include this dual solution to every internet freedom issue that we are facing. So I kind of want to talk to you about some of the initiative that we've done over the past 10 years, because that's what I can speak of. I think 7 years ago, not 7 years ago, I'm sorry, I think probably like 4 years ago, we've realized that talking about like walking in silos or, like it was the same voices. We found ourselves in an echo chamber. We had the same partners. We were having the same discussion, but we knew also that, issues and trends were being copied rapidly across the region. So we created a program out of that need that just focused on bringing new voices to the space. We were trying to bridge that gap, and we were intentional in working with not the traditional digital rights advocates. So for that project, we wanted to work with traditional human rights defenders. We wanted to work with women's organization, youth. We wanted, part of the coalition that we built in Cameroon has health organization, had journalists in there, had some local businesses. So we were very intentional in trying to like bridge that gap and have all these people who actually work in the information ecosystem together to talk about these issues. We've also believed that of trying to support a lot of, like, just to what Carolina has mentioned, there's not a lot of initiative, and I know it doesn't sound sexy to a lot of donors to support, network building or coalition building or fellowship. I appreciate the technology. It made us closer, but nothing can replace like the human contact. And so we find a lot of value in bringing our partners together. Our partners love to hear from each other. We've built into our existing program what we call our partners meeting, where we brought all of our partners from 4 regions, Latin America, Africa, Eastern Europe, and MENA, Asia, together to talk about the issue that they face at the local level and talk about, gave them an opportunity to share best practices and lessons learned. So I think there's value in, if not supporting, but strengthening regional network. And so the way Internews does it is, again, sometimes through our programming, but also we are based in Washington, D.C., and in Europe. We're part of a lot of global network. We make sure that we give access to those networks to our partners so they can tap into those networks. Again, another initiative that we've done that I really thought was incredible was, again, bringing together for the first time, like listening to our partners, is very important to us, and it makes us adapt our program to their needs. Sometimes when we build a project, and by the time we're implementing, things may change. I talk about this project that focused on usability of open source privacy and security tool. The first phase of that project was really building developers and end users who are using those open source security and open source tools. And we realized that a lot of our partners, because they all work in very sensitive country and are very from at-risk community, did not always feel comfortable with meeting with a developer that they've never known before. And they will ask, is this like a spy? Like, we don't know this person. And so we leverage our communities of trainers that we've built over the past 10 years and use those as intermediaries between our partners on the ground and the tool developers, because our partners are more connected to the trainer community than the tool developer community. So these are just some of the things that we've done over the past 10 years as an organization that believe that, that support internet freedom and believe that this is an important work that we should still fund, despite all the challenges that we have. We're trying to respond to the needs that we have, that we see for our partners, whether it's like working in silos, whether it's mainstreaming, recognizing that we're also like a funder. So we still have to write proposals, we still have to win them. So balancing that, we've learned a lot over the past 10 years.
Well, and so, I've been so grateful to hear from our partners and their perspectives today, but we also want to hear from you. We have about 10 minutes, and so are there any questions, things that people would like to raise? If people prefer to raise them privately, we actually have a lovely reception that Google has also prepared for us, so people are also welcome to raise those questions over wine and beer. I don't want to keep you from that, but does anyone have a thought or question that they would like to share before we wrap up? Is it that everyone wants wine? That's fair. I understand that. I feel that. Pardon me? What? What? I thought I heard something. I thought I just heard, it was just witty commentary. It's just witty side commentary. All right, well, with that, I will thank everyone for listening today. And hopefully we were really able to impart some new perspectives, some different perspectives. I'm so grateful to all of our panelists for taking the time to be with us here today and for sharing their thoughts. And they're all going to be around for a while during the reception, so I really can't encourage you enough to speak with them directly, get their perspectives, hear what's happening in their countries, and trade information and cards and what have you, because it's DC, and what's a happy hour without the trading of business cards? And so with that, please, let's go enjoy a great reception and hang out.